All right, thanks a lot for coming, folks. Thanks for skipping lunch for this. My name is Jeff Ragusa. I'm with the Google Apps team. I'm a channel manager. We are going to talk today about cloud computing and about Google Apps in particular. We're going to talk about how it relates to those of you in the business of providing services and solutions to business customers. So our Google Apps Partnership Program, our Reseller Program is kind of the backdrop here, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I want to get into addressing the issue that I think is top of mind for a lot of folks in the IT industry when they think about cloud computing or software as a service, and that is the question of how do I make money on this stuff? Or even flipping it the other way around, how do I avoid losing the money that my clients may be currently paying me as the world kind of shifts away from high margins of on-premise software and on-premise hardware and installed software, and shifts from product-based revenue to services-based revenue. So we're going to talk about that. And then we've got Daniel Jefferies, who's from Newmind, who's one of our great early partners, and he's going to come up and share some of his experiences with our reseller program and then bringing this business to business customers and growing his business. I think you'll be able to relate well to the things he has to say. So we look forward to that. So cloud computing, all the rage. Cloud computing for businesses means that your data and applications reside in the network. At Google, we run the largest cloud computing applications in the world. There's not much doubt about that. From Google Search, Google.com, Google Maps, Google Earth, YouTube, Gmail, Google Apps. We maintain worldwide availability and uptime that's unparalleled in the software world. And then we're doing all of this with millions of users using it. And so all those things together make us a global leader in cloud computing. I think that's probably a common theme that you hear throughout the sessions here at I/O. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we've built a large number of massive data centers around the world. And then we build our own hardware. We fill those data centers with custom-built hardware that's meant to be cost-effective and energy efficient and really designed from scratch to host an internet-scale software platform where we're able to have applications that scale to millions of users while at the same time providing near constant uptime, and they have the ability to accept frequent feature updates. So it's kind of a nice hat trick, and this is why businesses come to Google. This is why we have an enterprise group that I'm a part of and that the Google Apps team is a part of, and this is why that group is thriving. So drilling down on that in terms of what it means for businesses, what are some of the benefits? So this is just a few. First of all is cost. So computing at this scale allows us to radically lower costs. And our cost of computing effectively an order of magnitude or more lower than on-premise solutions. The other thing that we're able to do with cloud computing is roll out features into the software platform at a much faster rate than you could with traditional software. I'm going to talk about our Google Apps Suite, where just as an example, we've rolled out over 150 new features into the suite in the 2 years since it's launched. And those are seamlessly picked up and deployed to users. So speaking of users, happier end users, how do you get happier end users? Well, again, for example, in the Google Apps Suite, what we're able to do is to watch, at scale, users, how they're using the applications, and then make modifications and adjustments to the applications based on the empirical evidence of how they're interacting with it. And we're able to do that at scale. And again, that's just something that you can't get with traditional software applications, that feedback loop. So I want you to, this is why businesses are coming to Google for this, and why they're coming why they're moving their businesses to the cloud. But for those of you, if you're in the IT services business, the message here, which we'll talk about more, is that this pertains to you. You've got to have a cloud strategy of your own, of some sort, be it with Google or somebody else, because this stuff is undeniable. So we'll talk more about that. But at Google, our cloud really takes two forms as it relates to businesses and business applications. Very simply, there's our apps and there's your apps. And when I say your apps, I'm assuming I'm talking to folks at Google I/O, developers, solution providers, and folks. It's you being able to create applications on our cloud. And what happens is our apps and your apps sit next to each other on our scalable serving architecture, and they're able to integrate well with one another. So on the your app side, we talked about Google App Engine. There are a number of sessions here at I/O that go into depth on Google App Engine. I'm going to touch on them a little bit, but then I'm also going to talk about Google Apps, which is the form that our apps take in the cloud. And this is our business application suite, which I'm going to drill down into more. So anyways, our apps and your apps. So Google Apps. So again, this is our business application suite, Google Apps Premier Edition. Effectively, this is a suite of tools for making messaging and collaboration easier within the context of businesses or teams. And it's a suite of services. It's constantly growing, which is kind of exciting, but currently consists of Gmail with embedded instant messaging and video chat, Google Talk for real-time communication, Google Calendar, Google Docs, spreadsheets and presentations. This is in Google Presentations. Google Sites, which is a service for building collaborative team websites, and Google Video for private video sharing and hosting. So it's all these things, again, hosted on the Google Cloud, and accessible to users through a web browser, anywhere, anytime access, or through mobile devices. But then it's branded for the end customer, right? So meaning that the most obvious example there is when you talk about having email addresses, and if a business has at mybusiness.com email addresses, Google Apps Suite, they're able to maintain those email addresses, mybusiness.com, but just have Google in the back end powering the mail servers. There's an administrative interface to all of this, and then there are administrative APIs to be able to integrate in with existing systems, either other cloud-based systems or systems inside the firewall. And it's meant to be highly interoperable. You can have some of these services turned on, some turned off. You can have some users using the Google Apps system and other users using a different system and have them be able to work well together. So I could go into a demo, but I feel like generally the crowd at these Google I/O conferences have a good idea of Google Apps as far as how it relates to business users, and so I'm not going to do that. I could also talk about the business viability in terms of trying to prove the security or the interoperability or reliability. Instead, I'm going to talk about that within the context of what you as a solution provider can do with your clients. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But I will say two things. One, it's not free. You can see at the top there, this is a product that we're selling to businesses at $50 per user per year. This is a subscription. And the second thing is around traction. So we launched this a little over 2 years ago. In aggregate, we got over 10 million active users, well over that at this point. And then we're at a run rate of over 3,000 organizations a day that are signing up for this. So traction across the board with companies of all sizes. You may have seen in the news, we just rolled out or completed the rollout of 30,000 users at Valeo, which is a French automotive components manufacturer, just a couple weeks ago. We're excited about that. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, thousands and thousands and thousands of small businesses are picking up on this. In fact, over the past year, we've seen over 300% growth in terms of the number of small businesses that are using this paid product. Not just in spite of, but in large parts because of the economic conditions. Okay, so here's kind of an interesting part, and this is kind of where you come in. This is an interesting time. We see that there are a lot of companies that are interested in the benefits here. What we found, particularly with small and mid-sized businesses, is that they don't have the time, the staff, or the expertise to be able to fully adopt these services into the businesses themselves. And so for that reason, what we did was we launched a reseller program, just as that adoption curve is starting to spike. Now, the point that I want to make here, we'll talk about the reseller program specifics in a second, but I want to make this point that this is a new program, as in we just started transactions en masse with resellers in mid-April, so a little over a month ago. We launched this program back in January, got a ton of interest, thousands of applications from all over the world. We basically put the brakes on folks while we got our operations in order, and like I said, we really, with the vast majority, just started operations last month. So if you're here, this is the point being that this is definitely a new opportunity. You're not behind if you haven't gotten started yet. But that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is around the opportunity for leapfrogging established VARs and solution providers here. So I've been at Google for a little over 3 years, working with partners, and a couple things that have kind of come clear. One is that there are a lot of folks who get this stuff. All the stuff I just talked about with cloud computing, a lot of our partners, some of them I can actually recognize some faces in the crowd here, and we're going to hear from Daniel in a little bit. People get this. But the other thing I recognize, there's a lot of folks, particularly there's a lot of folks in the IT services industry who they may get it as well, but they're either unwilling or unable to adjust their business models or their strategic approach to take advantage of the paradigm shifts that we're talking about here. So there's a real opportunity for early mover advantage here, basically, because we have, especially in this economy, we have a situation where from small business owners to to Fortune 500 CFOs, everybody's basically looking to find ways to creatively get more for less. And you, as a reseller, a small business reseller, or a reseller targeting larger customers, if there's tremendous value in you being the hero and bringing a technology solution to bear on this. So anyway, that's kind of the backdrop. There's a URL at the bottom that you probably want to jot down, google.com/app/resellers. It just has more information on the program, including a simple application form. It walks you through the qualification process, and the program is free. I'll leave that up, and we'll just real briefly talk about the basics of the program in pictures. So this is you. You were a frog on the last slides. Now you're a little foosball guy. So this is you. You become a reseller. You get this little authorized reseller badge, and then what you're doing is you're going to bring Google Apps Premier Edition, the suite that we just talked about, to your business customers. So these could be new or existing clients, and you can. The key thing here is that you can take it and bundle it in with existing solutions offerings or existing services contracts. And then you're going to help those clients deploy and roll out the product, and you're going to handle billing with them as commensurate with the agreements that you have in place with them. And then you're going to provide additional services, including consulting, support, custom integration, and so forth. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. Okay, now backing up a second as you kind of zoom out, Google is in the background, and basically what we're doing is we're providing you the product at 20% off the list price. And this, as I mentioned, the product is a subscription fee product, so this is a recurring discount. And then we're basically helping you to sell, market, deploy, and support by providing online community and partner support resources. And then we also provide you a super user-like console for managing and supporting your Google Apps clients. So before I move away from the slide, a big tenet of the program is that as we look at this, you, the reseller, is in the middle of this, and that's very intentional. If you've built trusted relationships with your clients and they trust you for technology advice or support, we don't want to get in the middle of that. SaaS or no SaaS, cloud or no cloud, these are your customers, and you're going to control the relationship. And so you're definitely at the centerpiece of this program, and our communications, any communications, go through you. So as you might imagine, I mentioned online resources. We've got a partner portal. This was actually built in Google Sites, which is one of the services that I mentioned. Lots of marketing and sales materials and tools, product and training materials as well. On the sales side, just as an example, we'll give you presentations and data sheets that you can take, internalize and customize and when speaking to your clients. Demo scripts where you can walk through the product, tips and tricks, things that we do when we're selling in the field. On the marketing side, one of the things we found to be really effective is working, especially for small business folks, working with a local chamber of commerce, set up, do a seminar, and we'll provide the support for you on that, as well as partner branding and such. Technical training, comprehensive technical training that's really targeted at IT professionals. This is not the kind of thing that you'd find on our Google Apps website where we're really trying to target the users. And it really centers on, generally on the deployment side of things, where things can get really complex, and on the custom integration side of things. And there's a discussion forum, which is lively, and you'll find Googler folks in there, as well as a number of resellers. This is partner specific, and discussion across a range of topics. It's technical as well as sales and marketing business topics. Okay, I mentioned the client management console. This actually is just, if you haven't seen it, this is just a standard Google Apps control panel. But as a reseller, what you get built in is this link to your reseller tools. Clicking on that brings up essentially a super user control panel where you can drill down through a list of customers. You can drill down into any of your clients' control panels and do configuration settings, service settings, and support, problem diagnosis, things like that. You can also provision and order new customers directly from here with Google, and you can manage your invoices with Google and set up a support flow so that customers know how to contact you. So that we're going to have in the customer's admin console contact Google. You can basically fill that out with a contact us with much more information, a customized help center, things like that. Okay, so if you've been paying attention to the financials so far. We talked about Google Apps, $50 per user per year, ongoing. We talked about the reseller program at 20%. So as a reseller, if you were to just sell the product at list price, you're going to walk away with $10 per user per year. which for the majority of folks is not going to make a viable business model in and of itself. And so you really need to focus on these value-added services, which we're going to talk about. And this is not Google specific, as we look at, as you might imagine, we look at cloud-based solutions in general. Because the costs are coming down, the product margins themselves are going to be squeezed, and you're going to need to focus on services. But one of the things I'd counter that, one of the things that we find is that in this cloud-based world, there tends to be a lot more budget room open for you to provide valuable business services, and we're going to drill down on that. So you can actually, if you play your cards right and you approach it in the correct way, you can actually make more money in this world rather than less. So let's take a closer look at that. So in a typical on-premise solution, kind of a traditional messaging solution, we'll say, where does the customer's money go? So first off, they're spending. There's going to be a lot of a good chunk of change that goes to the hardware manufacturer, and a good chunk that goes to goes on software licenses to the software manufacturer. And as a reseller of that, you're going to make a hefty margin on that. This green area is the part that you get. And of course, the proportions here are going to depend on the market segment and on the products. But I think you get the idea. There's also a set of services that you can provide, everything from training users on upgrades to fixing problems and so forth. So this is, I'm generalizing, but this is you can make a good living in today's world by doing this, by playing in this world. Now, in the Google Apps world, as we talked about, the product itself is much more affordable for customers, and so that piece of the pie is smaller. As a reseller, you still get your margin, but again, it's a margin of a smaller pie, so you're going to be making less on margin. But what this does, again, is it opens up tremendous budget room for you to provide additional services, specifically services that are driving business value. So this is your part now. And what's left? Well, effectively, the pie itself has gotten a lot smaller. And so what's left actually goes back to the customers in terms of cost savings. So you think about that, you look at this picture, this is a win-win. The customer is saving money than they were, over what they were in the last picture. You're actually making more money. The green part of this is bigger than it was in the last slide. And the reason for that is because the technology itself is kind of enabling these economics. So it's a win-win. And the other thing, going back to what I had said earlier around everybody from small businesses to CFOs looking to try and get more for less, that's exactly the picture that we've got here, where as a customer, right, they look at this and like, well, I'm getting a great product, I'm getting additional value from the reseller, and I'm saving money while we're at it. So this is a really compelling picture. And this is what we want. This is what we want to get to. This is what I want to get all of my resellers to. Okay. So lastly, bring up Daniel. But lastly, we're going to talk about the services that our partners are having success providing. And I've organized them into these 4 buckets just to kind of help us think about and talk about them. But this is by no means an exhaustive list. So deployment planning, pre-sales deployment planning. This is particularly relates to mid-size and larger deployments. Where you've got a fit test and you've got a proof of concept and architecture assessments and perhaps a managed pilot. What we do is we've got an entire site devoted to deployment planning materials that's partner facing and that you can go into, and we've built a detailed enterprise pilot guide that you can use and walk through, and it's really meant to address this piece of the pie. Deployment, setup, data migration, change management, and training. We're going to step into each of these in a minute. Managed services for generating recurring revenue for various types of support, customization, systems integration, and custom application development. So again, not actually I would say that this is not exhaustive, but if you look at this and there's really not like all of these services, all of these buckets fit just as well into the on-premise world, and that makes sense, right? It's like at some level, you've got technology, whether it lives in the cloud or it lives inside a firewall. You've got technology and you've got users, and you've got to bring those two together. And so there's a set of services that makes sense in that space. So in many ways, there's not much difference between the two when we're talking about services. Okay, so a couple of things. Once a customer decides to move to Google Apps, a couple of things that need to be done, and then a bunch more things that can be done. DNS records management. In order to activate the services, everybody's got to have DNS. Every size customer's got to. Their DNS records need to be manipulated to be routing mail and so forth. So we look at that. User account creation and setup. You can do this. We've got bulk creation tools. We've also got synchronization tools for LDAP, Active Directory, Domino, things like that. For mail routing, this is a big one because in general, most deployments you're going to be working on are going to have some existing mail solution. And so what we do is we've got a way for you to set up dual delivery where you can take email for a period of time and route it to both Google Apps and an existing solution during a rollout period for backup purposes or for the sake of allowing users to kind of migrate over at their own pace. The other thing that you can do is split routing, where you can have some users, as I mentioned earlier, some users on the Google Apps system, some users on another system. They're on the same domain, and email gets routed appropriately. Data migration, particularly for mail and contacts, is a big thing that you're likely going to need to tackle. We've got tools for doing this on the server side or at the admin level, where you can migrate over either entire org at a time remotely. And then we've also got tools that you can provide to end users, you're online, to be able to migrate themselves. And that's across mail and contacts. There's also tools available for calendar migration and docs migration. Some of these tools Google has built, some third parties have built. We've got a solutions marketplace that you can dive into and find a lot of great tools in there. Next thing is mobile access. So this is a huge thing. Mobile and desktop access. There's a whole set of mobile devices, and they're basically options for accessing and using Google Apps services. Each of the services across each of these devices in a couple of different ways. So it's kind of a three-dimensional matrix. But you can think of being able to sync the applications with native applications on the device. So, for example, be able to use IMAP to pull in email into a native mail application, or we've got a Google Sync tool that uses Active Sync to be able to pull in calendar and contacts likewise. The other thing is we've got J2ME applications, Gmail for mobile being one of the most popular ones, where you can install that onto certain smartphones to get a Gmail interface. We've also built applications that are preloaded into Android devices. And then there's a set of browser-based apps. So, for example, in the iPhone case, we built an integrated suite that runs in the Safari browser, specifically built for the iPhone. Last thing I'll mention here is we announced a little while ago that a Google Apps connector for BlackBerry Enterprise Server. So, coming in July, what you'll be able to do is do push mail out to BlackBerry devices using this plugin. And like I said, there's a ton of third-party tools here as well that are on the solutions marketplace for both synchronization and migration. Interop, particularly as it relates to calendar, is really big. If you've got Exchange clients and you've got some Exchange expertise, what you can do is you can basically set it up so that you share free busy information between Exchange and Google Apps, such that you can have some users on one system, some users on the other, and they'd be able to schedule meetings with one another. So that's really useful. And then user training is a big part of change management. Again, we've got an entire site, lots of materials to help you with this. And in many ways, this goes beyond kind of teaching users how to send an email, but it's really how do you map the Google Apps world and functionality into the language, the terminology that they're used to using in a previous system. That's kind of where the art of that comes in. So if you submit an application to the Reseller Program, you'll get an email back right away that'll point you directly to that site. It'll be easier than me rattling off the URL. So managed services and support. So become a managed service provider. So what I mean by this is embrace the efficiency that I'm talking about that the cloud provides. So as an example, if you've got clients, as much as possible, don't charge your clients an hourly rate. Right, charge them based on the business value that you're providing. So, for example, one example, you can go to a client and say, look, for $10,000, I'm going to bring you a rock-solid, innovative, fast, secure email system, and I'm going to manage and support it for you for a year, and you don't have to worry about a thing. Right, and then you can take that, and you can not only just provide software installation services, but actually provide those technology services wrapped within this business-focused guidance. So become the trusted technology advisor is really what I'm getting at. So some examples. I mentioned earlier we have 150 plus new features rolled into Google Apps in the last 2 years. Customers can't keep up with that, but you can. And we have a feed that you can subscribe to, and as new features come across the wire, you can dig into them and really determine which features make sense for your customers and then bring those to your client's attention. There's tremendous value in that. Monitoring, if you're a managed service provider, this is not the kind of monitoring that they may be used to, but it's kind of the cloud-based version. We launched a status dashboard for Google Apps a couple of months ago. And what you can do here is you can not only monitor if there's issues that come up with one of the services, and you can proactively notify your clients, but also if if those result in SLA violations, what you can do is you can notify clients, and you can actually wind up getting service refunds from Google for that. Usage activity reports, there's a ton of these or there's a growing number of these in the Google Apps control panel. The vast majority of customers are not going to make use of them, but if you dive into them, there's a lot of value that can be created there. Not sure if you know that you can actually integrate Google Analytics with Google Sites and Google Docs, and you can do things like generate reports for clients that allow you to see which sites or which docs are the most popular and kind of gauge relative traffic there. So that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of folks aren't aware of. Comprehensive help desk support, I mentioned earlier. Contact Google, contact the reseller, and you can do things like plug in your own help center, your own contact information. And what we're seeing is that just by the very nature of the tighter relationship the resellers have, is that a lot of customers, when faced with that, they would rather contact the reseller because they're going to get somebody on the phone, and they're going to get a much more personalized experience, somebody that knows their business. Make use of that. We looked at the control panel before, where you can dive into and help support and manage and diagnose issues for your clients. So there's a lot of areas in which you can provide value and be proactive about it and generate, garner recurring revenue based on that. Last thing that I wanted to address is application development, custom integration. So this is one area that I think a lot of resellers traditionally have shied away from, primarily because it's just too heavyweight. The infrastructure management and so forth is just too heavyweight. Now, the value in doing it is that, I mentioned before, we've got our apps and your apps. A lot of times customers will look at Google Apps and be like, that's great, but it would be great if it did that plus this, if it did this little thing or this little thing. And that's where resellers with development expertise, or resellers working with developers here, could take advantage of that if they can get over the infrastructure costs. And so that's where Google App Engine really is targeting the core of that, which is to make those infrastructure costs extremely lightweight. We've also, as of now, have a complete Java development stack. You can build things in Java on the server side, and you can also do Java development for the browser, where Google Web Toolkit allow that Java to be compiled down to JavaScript, which is cross-platform compliant and really fast. If you've done any web development and you haven't used Google Web Toolkit, you should check it out. It's really amazing. Speaking as someone who struggled with this back in 1998, building web applications across browser and struggling with JavaScript. There's a ton of things that we've added into this platform to make it more business, more enterprise viable over the past year. A couple of things, we've just now actually provided the ability to integrate with on-premise data via the secure data connector. There's a transparent deprecation policy on Google App Engine and on a number of these APIs that people are not everyone's aware of. And then integration with the Google Apps control panel, which we'll actually take a look at in a second. And then lastly, there are APIs, open APIs for reading and writing business objects to each of these services, and a UI customization framework around the Google Gadgets framework that you can dive into if you're doing any web development. And then there are a plethora of administrative interfaces and APIs for syncing users and groups, for setting up a custom authentication experience, for programmatically manipulating Gmail settings, and more. Okay, and then actually just to kind of tie together the visual on the Your Apps and Our Apps, so this is, again, a Google Apps Standard Control Panel, where you can actually install an App Engine-based app directly into the control panel and manage and deploy that to your users directly alongside email and calendar and sites and so forth. So that is it from me. We're gonna hold off on questions. I'm gonna pass it over to Daniel, again from Newmind Group, who's one of our early resellers. Is going to talk about how he's using this in his business. And so for that.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here. I just want to thank Jeff and Scott. There's great people working at Google, and I've been a part of a lot of different reseller programs, and it's great when there's good people behind the program. And that's the case here. All right. Look at time here. I'm just going to set a couple levels here. First, we'll talk about sort of, for you and for me, what I intend to cover here, to kind of remind myself. Set a little context with who we are and where we're coming from as a company. Talk a little bit about the business, how we're selling it, really kind of our story, something that we're iterating on even now. We're evolving this business model. And then deployment topics and stories, a little kind of tales from the trenches. And then we'll briefly touch on, since this is a developers conference, kind of a relationship between resellers and developers and how we think we can really help each other out. So a little bit about us. We're a small consulting and managed services company. We're based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We do have experience, kind of in the enterprise, but we've really kind of chosen over the last several years to kind of diversify away from that and work with companies where the decision-making is simple, where we can work directly with decision-makers rather than kind of enterprise business we've seen kind of come and go. So that's just a way we've chosen to go in our company. We still do work with enterprise clients, but we haven't chosen to focus on enterprise in quite a while. So we're coming very much from that perspective, and you'll see that throughout these slides. Small and mid-market clients, we've pretty much, after kind of a period of evaluation, we've pretty much drank the Kool-Aid on the cloud and SaaS platforms. Like Jeff was saying, we see it as disruptive. Whenever there's something disruptive, that favors, the up-and-comers. It doesn't favor the incumbents. Usually the incumbents are favored, but when there's a specifically cost disruption like this, really favors the up-and-comers, which we certainly are one. And there's lots of other folks. We're pretty active on the reseller forums, and Jeff's very active there too. There's lots of folks out there doing this, having success with it, and we're really pleased to be a part of that community. Let's talk a little bit about business topics, just to kind of help me understand. You've heard a little bit about me. How many do we have Google Apps Authorized Resellers that are currently operating? Raise hands. Okay, we have some. That's great. Hopefully I'll get to meet some of you guys afterwards. Just want to kind of get a feel for who I'm talking to. So, the business model. Where did we start? How did we get here? It's really pretty simple story. In 2007, we were seeing some real issues surrounding email with specifically our small clients. And these are clients that are small headcount, so they don't have large dollars in the budget, but very, very dependent on their email. Real estate industry in particular is one that is in that boat. So we started moving clients to apps really because for spam and stability issues on small clients' platforms, that was really the way to go for us that we saw. 2008, we moved our own messaging, really began to get more familiar with the program, and really saw that there was a strength there in the program, specifically around spam. That was kind of how we got into it. But then we started to see the productivity tools, docs and sites. Before we moved our messaging, I'd honestly never used docs or sites before. I didn't know really what all was there. And began to see even more strength there. So again, later in 2008, we selected apps as our preferred messaging program for our new and existing clients. So that just meant, new clients come to us, this is what we're going to recommend. Existing clients are having email pain, we're going to migrate them. And we also learned that the Reseller Program was planned basically through this event. Saw this event rebroadcast on YouTube from last year, and Jeff was talking about we've got this in the works, and so that was great for us. We're already doing it. We're already using it with clients. We're basically going to get help for nothing, help for free. That's great. So we were a pretty easy sell for Jeff. All right. So then 2008, we began to see really, as we'd been using it for a little while then, we began to really see that the biggest uptake here and the biggest pain that we were seeing was really in what I would call very small business market. So less than 10 accounts, and really in terms of the burden on email servers, these people are just using straight POP and IMAP. There's very, very simple systems. But as far as the burden on those users and the burden on the systems, they haven't scaled with needs. Email usage is has far exceeded, has gone way up. Spam intake has gone way up, and these systems that these people are using haven't scaled, and so now they're pretty, they're feeling a lot of pain. So 2009, we're accepted into the Reseller Program. Immediately launched local PR campaign, and that really was great for us. That using the Google brand and leveraging that not only helped us, to sell Google Apps, but in our local market helped us incredibly just to raise our profile and to get looks on all of our other services. We're traditionally on-site, managing systems with clients over the long term. We're not kind of project by project. There's some consulting companies that are like that, where they kind of jump from project to project. We have our clients are our clients. We sign annual contracts with them. So that's kind of our traditional. So that worked very well for us, and also helped to promote apps as a product in our market. But what we really saw was for small business, there's a lot of pain, and we need to kind of change how we're doing things. Rather than this on-site focus, we need to diversify, and we need to have a team that can deliver app services remotely, can do setup and migration, so we can widen our market nationally. Because this is really a long-tail proposition, right? That's really kind of an opportunity that we see. There's lots of opportunities. There's lots of resellers that are focusing on enterprise. There's opportunities there. We have mid-market capabilities, and we're certainly going to use those. But we see a lot of pain in the long tail, and we think that there's a business opportunity there. So in our existing team, we want to launch this small business team, and our existing team is going to serve larger projects like Jeff was talking about, where fit tests are necessary, deployment training is necessary. These are all things that we're used to doing from on-site assignments with more, kind of mid-market companies. All right, how have we gone about marketing and selling apps? We've certainly using PR to leverage the Google brand locally. Our little company becomes part of the reseller, program. It's not going to make national news. It's not going to hit the blogosphere. None of that's going to happen. I realize this, but locally with local TV news, radio, papers, all of that stuff in our area where we're really focused, it makes an impact, and it has made an impact. There's been coverage. There's been new clients because of that in areas, in apps and in other areas. So that's really been a benefit to us. So that's really PR and media awareness, doing workshops and webinars and things like that is really what has been our kind of attention grabber to bring clients in. And then, once we're in front of them, how do we sell them? Well, we sell the cost savings, and it's usually a pretty easy sale. In fact, with a certain number of clients, we get what I call a too good to be true objection, especially if they're moving from on-prem Exchange. They're like, you mean I don't have to maintain this stuff or anything? This has got to be it's got to be an awful system because it's way too cheap to be comparable to what I have now. And so then we've got to sell the product quality to kind of overcome that objection. And we explain to them that, no, actually, this is really a paradigm shift. This is particularly with docs and sites, this is being able to share in ways that you've never been able to share before. This is breaking out of attachment hell, which those of you that have been in attachment hell, you understand what I'm talking about. I've certainly been there. And then we also talk about the simplicity, particularly of the web, the web client versus kind of what you're used to in your email, which is feature bloat. Lots and lots of features, all competing for your attention. Lots of security vulnerabilities built into those features. Lots of updates and all kinds of things. Users understand this. Users see that pain, and so when you talk to them about simplicity, you talk to them about that, and maybe they have to give up a pet feature, but what they're gaining is much more. They're gaining something that does the core features very, very well. just to speak to product quality also, we've had to overcome an objection about, I guess the way to put it would be just using a web-based interface. And you can use Outlook with it. We really found clients see much more productivity gains if they use the web-based interface. But there's a cultural thing right now that has been traditional, that is web-based is kind of second-class citizen. And that comes from things like Outlook Web Access. That comes from lots of different things that people have used, where you really have been a second-class citizen if you're using web versus if you're using Outlook or some other client of choice. But we really feel like, certainly in our personal practice and what we've seen with clients, that that's not the case anymore. That there really is, doing it on the web is really great. We sell the security. Clients are going to bring it up. This is really a trust issue. It's a new thing. People are scared of new things, anything new. And we basically frame it as, who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust, your server in the back room? And as trustworthy as I am, in some cases, these clients, I'm the one that's administrating the service. But I tell them straight out, are you going to trust me to keep up on all the security vulnerabilities, all of this stuff that needs to be kept up on? Or are you going to trust, arguably the best data centers in the world, arguably the best security engineers in the world? And that's sort of how we frame it for people. And it goes more in depth than that, but that's the basic gist of it. I want to make sure we get questions here, so I'm going to breeze through a couple of these things and go on to some deployment kind of stories so you can see sort of what it's like for us when we work with a client, move them to apps, and the relationship there. Okay, so here's a story that happened. I call this old dogs versus new dogs. A lot of these stories are really gonna touch on what I think is the main issue for us in implementing apps, in that because of the paradigm shift of how it works, because it's web-based rather than client, because it's sharing documents and sites rather than emailing them all around. Really, the hardest part of our job isn't the technology. The hardest part of our job is the change management, no matter how big or small the client is. A successful deployment means they understand how things are changing, and they understand how to leverage, and their people understand how to leverage that new paradigm. So old dogs versus new dogs. This is a story. It was a real estate company. They had Outlook clients, BlackBerry handhelds. They had some, their pain was they had some serious spam issues. We had one box that was 30,000 spams a day coming into one box that I measured 2 days. It could have been more than that on other days. And that was a situation where their current spam solution was getting hammered to a level that it would basically lock up, fail. It was basically a denial of service attack on their spam solution. That was 30,000 spams getting through the spam solution, by the way, not hitting the spam solution. Pardon me. So that was where their pain was: reliability issues, spam issues. And the nice thing about apps was that pain came upon them very quickly. And because of the way apps works, we were able to roll out for them in a weekend. Never could have done that with an on-prem solution. We'd had to order hardware. We'd had to get it all installed, patched up, make sure everything's good, plan it all out. We could deploy this very, very quickly for them. And the spam handling was much better. The reliability, this is Google scale, so the reliability was great. Everyone's happy. Some users stay on Outlook. The change-averse users stay on Outlook. And there were people there that are like, man, this is awesome. I want to use it. Excellent. So that was definitely a win for us, and it would have been harder to do migrating them with on-prem. This story kind of highlights something that I like to call, sort of an organic an organic discovery that happens in our apps deployments usually. This was a client, they're a commercial laundry, very price sensitive, very, very price sensitive, kind of a manufacturer's profile for those of you that have worked in different industries. And so they're experiencing email pain, boxes too small, reliability issues, spam issues, et cetera. But because they're price sensitive, the $50, man, this looks big. Man, $50 per user, that's too much. They were running real slim pop boxes, larger companies, hundreds of employees, but running it real slim, very price sensitive. Basically what happened was we implemented for a subset of users. We did split delivery like Jeff was talking about. Some users are second-class citizens. They go to the old system. Really critical, sales and executives and different people that really, will annoy the operations people if their email goes down. Those guys all go on apps. What we found was that because apps was available, people started to see what they had. People started to not use Outlook and use the web interface for, some stuff. We had all the functions turned on, and we get this organic discovery happening where people just, oh, here's some features. Oh, what do these do? They start playing with it, and they leave Outlook behind. And then they're saying, well, I want to use these functions with these other people in the company. And so now we've got to deploy. This is why I call it the longest deployment, because first it's a little subset. Eventually this company is going to be completely on apps because they just keep on asking for more and more people because different departments and different people want that functionality to work for their department. So that's easy for us. That's an easy sell. It's good for them. One quote that came out of that experience was a fella found Google Sites, somebody in sales, and he kind of came and found me, and he's like, A, why didn't you tell me about this before? And B, I'm going to save hours. You just blew my mind. My mind is blown. That was the quote. So when you get quotes like that from clients, that's exciting. That means something's going well, something's going right. Usually they call me when things break. All right, I'm going to breeze through here. Another great example, which dovetails into the last thing I'm going to talk about, which is reseller and developer relationships. This is an example that actually was sent to me by Cloud Sherpas, who are another Google Apps Authorized Reseller. And they had a client who wanted to move Exchange shared folders to Google Sites. And what they did, they found that there's not a smooth way to do this. So here's an opportunity where the market's essentially telling them, we need a tool for this. An actual client telling them. So what did they do? They built a tool called Google Sites Bulk File Uploader. They made their client happy and had a successful migration and training associated with that. But they also now have an asset that they have available for sale on their website. And so they've created multiple streams of income out of that. So that's something I certainly hope to do in our business. We haven't done it yet. And I think there's lots of opportunities surrounding those sorts of tools. All right, so resellers, a developer's best friend. I'm going to quickly touch on this, and I definitely want to get to questions. I'm basically working from where I'm at, and I want to make connections with developers because there are so many opportunities for tools out there in this platform that's fairly young, that's vibrant, there's a lot of innovation happening, and I want to be a part of that. And so this is an open call. If you're a developer and you're developing tools, I want to hear about it. We're building our tool set, both for our small team, for remote delivery of these services, and also for our existing team. But resellers make excellent beta testers. We live and breathe with the users right next to them. They breathe on our necks. We know exactly what they want. We know their pain. We're very close. We're very close to them. And so we make excellent beta testers, and we want these products, so we're easier to get involved. Sometimes your beta programs, it's hard to get users involved. Resellers know what clients need. I have a lot of clients that are kind of clamoring for more flexible contact management. I'd love to see a day when either a third party or Google or somebody has made contacts shareable just like a doc is shareable. So you can share it with individual people inside, outside your domain. You can add custom fields to it, and it's very flexible. I hope that day comes. These are all just things that, clients have talked about. I'd love to see deployment and provisioning tools. That's really resellers would buy that, just to make deployment and provisioning to further automate that system. There are tools within Google Apps already to do some of that, but the more automation we can get, the better. It makes our jobs easier. Logging and accountability, really kind of pulling out some metrics out of the APIs and out of how people are using the system better than there is today. So these are all things. There's APIs for all these things, and there's great opportunities, and we want to work with people and help with that. And then there's the obvious things: App Engine projects, custom gadgets that resellers without a development expertise can really use in a relationship with a developer. So I want to wrap up by just saying, again, in tech, I know for me, I get talked to a lot when things are broken, but I want to, I guess, just thank everybody on the Google Apps team, both product and in the enterprise group, for making a great product. I don't know if Raj and Sheth is in here. I saw him walking around earlier, but to his team and everybody, from my clients for sure, thank you for a great product, and I think we're opening it up for questions.
We turn on. Oh, we got them both up. Okay, thanks. So, any questions? I think we have 8 minutes or so for questions.
Sure.
Yep.
Question one: as a reseller, I'm sure my customers trust Google to a certain extent, but they want to have the data in their hands at some point. Is there some facilitated local backup people can do of all their Google Docs, or some other way in which they can fetch that locally? So that's one question. Another question is, as a Google App Engine developer using Google Docs, can I make certain documents read-only or not touchable by the end customer so it becomes a permanent part of a record of a workflow, for example, an invoice or some other thing? Are there security mechanisms in place for things like that?
Yeah, good question. So I guess in that order, question was around initial question around maintaining the data locally and kind of feeling kind of that under the mattress, in the mattress syndrome, where you want to be able to have control of your own data. I guess there's a couple of different facets to that, and it really, I think you agree. Like you can kind of dig deeper and figure out like why customers are asking that. Is it a privacy question? Is it a reliability question? That sort of thing. So each from a privacy perspective, our policies certainly across the board are that the customers and the users own their own data. And so what we do is we make it really easy for you to pull that data out either via APIs or via, I mentioned some standard protocols like IMAP and CalDAV and things like that. In the case of Docs, there isn't really standard protocols. What we do is we've got an API that's actually based on the Atom standard feed protocol, and we basically extended that with specific data structures around spreadsheet cells and documents and so forth. And then on top of that API, folks have actually built tools. It's kind of, I think the demand is kind of, it's more kind of people kind of talk about, this would be nice to have. I haven't seen the market demand where we've had a whole lot of third parties building tools, but I know there's a tool that one of our partners built recently that does sync between Google Docs and Microsoft Office Docs, where you can be working either in Microsoft Office and have it be synced up to Google Docs and vice versa. That's a little plug-in for Office.
My experience with that particular question is usually it's a security and type of I want to be more like my existing on-prem solution and have it in my nice little closet wherever. And what we've done is say yes, that's possible, and we budget to build something from the APIs to do that for them, and then they see the price and they say, no, I don't want it that bad. So it's usually an objection that is handleable without actually having to implement anything, in our experience at least.
The second part of the question is around around access to documents and can documents be made read-only. This is kind of built into the, not even just the APIs, built into the product itself, is that essentially the security layer, at the application layer, authentication or authorization is handled on a per user, per document level. So you can basically share a document. I could share a document with Daniel, and I can share it with him in such a way that it's read-only, or I can share it with him in such a way that it's read-write. And then I, as the owner, can pull that away at any time. And so you can programmatically, I believe the Docs API at this point has the ability to programmatically manipulate that ACL as well. Okay, yes?
Thank you for a good presentation. We understand the business model for small businesses, 10 users, 20 users, 50 users. Curious about any Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 corporations that may have decided to move away, say, from a Microsoft platform to a Google Apps platform. If you could share with us any names, and we'd like to know, have some idea how far along they are or how successful, given that there may be, for instance, existing applications which are written in .NET, for instance, that may need remediation, or written in other legacy languages or older architectures which may need remediation. Number one question. Number two, can we find anywhere a compatibility guide, for instance, between the features offered by the Google Apps suite and, for instance, the Microsoft suite, so enterprises of greater than 50 users can make an educated choice and an educated, informed decision? And also the third question is there a roadmap, for instance, of the Google Apps platform published anywhere that Google can share with us as to what they're currently offering as what they're visioning 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road? For instance, enterprises like ours can go to the Microsoft site and pull down product, how long the product's going to live, when is the next release, how long will that release be supported? I mean, there are a lot of questions from an enterprise, a larger enterprise than 10, 20 users, that we need to ask before being able to go down such a path.
Okay. I may need to have you remind me of some of the earlier questions as part of that. But I guess just in reverse order on roadmap, a lot of the things that I talk about in terms of innovation and our ability to adapt with the market and and adapt with how users are interacting with the product and so forth, a lot of that dictates that we're not able to provide even internally a 12-month or 36-month roadmap or some of the things that you're talking about. So that's not feasible. We do. If we're working with a partner and we know that they're building something that we're going to launch next week, there's certain ways in which we can work with them to kind of steer them in one direction or another. But generally providing roadmap and that kind of thing is just not. It conflicts largely with what we're trying to do in terms of trying to provide the best value for the customer, trying to remain agile there. I think the initial question was around Microsoft deployments. I mean, as you might imagine, within the enterprise world, you mentioned mid-size and larger deployments. Microsoft, to one degree or another, with Office or with Exchange or SharePoint, is into all of these accounts. So all of the customers that I showed on the adoption slide, we talked about Vallejo, which certainly fit into the category of a large customer with 30,000 users distributed. They actually worked with one of our partners, one of our reseller partners, Capgemini, over in Europe. Certainly, I mean, that was a long deployment cycle, and a long sales cycle before that. But certainly, there's a ton of ways in which they've had to find ways not just to replace. We're really not about replacing. How do we replace this Office functionality with Google Apps? It's really not the game. What we're trying to do is to replace. We're trying to get down to the core of what is the actual requirements, what are the user requirements, what are the business requirements, and then how do we solve that in a more effective way, in a more cost-efficient way. And so there are, and I can go down the line, we talked about some of them, like different ways in which products interoperate. We talked about Exchange calendar interoperability. We talked about email. And just the previous question, we talked about Docs and Microsoft Office. Between the tools that we create, which is based on market demand, and the tools that our partners are creating and putting into our solutions marketplace based on our open APIs, there's a lot of these kinds of things that you can play with. But it's certainly not a it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's certainly a case-by-case discussion that's based around the business requirements. Hope that answered some of the questions. I think that we are just about out of time. We're getting some cues from the folks in the back. But I want to thank everybody for coming, especially folks who took the time out of their lunch and and thank Daniel as well. Have a good day.